Okay, we are live, I believe. And if all goes well this time, then you can all hear me. And I'd like to just tell you that I was meant to meet with Styx and Hamer 666 today. He had some problems. We can't talk about occultism and his beliefs because he's got some guests. And basically, he doesn't think he can do anything while they're there. So I was going to do a stream about my beliefs instead, but just now I found out this news story is going live on National Geographic, and it was sent to me that there's a thing going down at the Museum of Brighton, and that's what I'm going to talk about instead for a while, and then I'll answer any questions that come in on the super chat. Can everyone just say that it's all working okay? Because yeah, it seems like it is. Well, anyway, I'll say this. This story is going to be a bit like Cheddar Man last year. Like last year, Cheddar Man, that whole thing blew up and went crazy, and everyone wanted me to comment on it. But I was a bit annoyed because a lot of the people who were like, they were seeing the way that the media were obviously trying to spin Cheddar Man to, like, you know, promote an agenda, a political agenda. But the people who were trying to counter it were using like misinformation and even going so far as to say that they made up this stuff. But it is true that the Western hunter-gatherers, that population of Western Europe, did have darker complexions, but it wasn't true that they were black people, as in Africans. They weren't like Africans. They were like modern Northern Europeans more than anything else. So the thing is, they had blue eyes, for example, and they had like Caucasoid skulls. So you wouldn't know from looking at the skull that they had dark complexion. We only know that they had dark complexions because of the DNA, which shows the absence of the genes associated with light skin. And those came into Europe later with the arrival of the Neolithic farmers. And the Neolithic farmers are the group to which this lady known as Whitehawk woman belongs. And they basically, like, a group of farmers came in from Anatolia, and they got to Britain, like, I don't know, like a few thousand years ago, like, what is it, 6,000 years ago, maybe something like that, maybe more, to Britain. And they had genetically, when we look at their DNA, they're quite similar to modern people from Iberia, and quite similar even more to modern day Sardinians. However, we can't say that just because they were genetically very much similar to Sardinians in every respect, that they had the exact same complexion, because they lived at a higher latitude. And if you've got a bunch of Sardinians living in England for a while today, it would probably, I don't know how long it would take, but especially in like in the Stone Age, like when there's selection pressure, they probably start to get lighter. So I would imagine that maybe they were as dark as Sardinians, maybe they were a bit lighter than Sardinians, but something like that. They're definitely on the European spectrum of complexions. We know that because they have the genes associated with European complexions. Maybe not as pale as I am, as like a Northern Europeans are now, which is the same complexion of Beaker people who came in and a bit later replaced these people around 4,500 years ago. Whitehawk women's people got replaced, but they were still on the European spectrum of complexions. I'm going to show you, I'm going to do a screen share and show you what we're talking about here, what the problem is, and because it's too much for me to try and just explain. So here we go. I'm sharing the screen now. Okay. Can you see this? Can you see this lady? They're displaying this in Brighton, and I went to uni in Brighton. I tell you, it's the most left-wing part of all of England. And it's a crazy place. And at the museum, they're showing this. But actually, this woman, she's meant to be a Neolithic farmer. But as you can see, the complexion's very dark. And there's something about the width of her nose as well, which makes it look like she's a bit like, you know, non-European. She looks like she has non-European ancestry. But this person, there's no reason to believe she has any non-European ancestry. Now, as part of actually a series of reconstructions, and I gotta say, actually, I think the reconstructions are pretty good, most of them. I don't like that one, but like, here's a Beaker man. Yeah, I don't know why they said get him clean shaven, but sure, it's okay. Here is an Iron Age Celt. That's fine. Yeah. And here's another. Was this another Beaker person? No, this is another Celt from the Iron Age, I think. And this is an Anglo-Saxon and all of these are based on skeletons that they had for the time. And this one, he's got they knew that this guy died from an abscess on the face. So he had a gross mutation towards the end of his life. Well, not a wound anyway. And they've decided to include that, but not at the severity it was at the time of his death. But I think these are quite good, actually. And some Nordic guy did them. But the only other one that the reason they've done this complexion, they admit that they said that she would have had a slightly darker complexion than the Beaker folk who replaced her as the Beaker folk. And the Beaker folk complexion is the same as modern day Northern Europeans. And the Neolithic farmers' complexion would probably be, as I said, either the same as modern Southern Europeans or somewhere between a modern Southern European and Northern European. This woman is not a modern Southern European complexion. They've gone way darker than what's normal. And that combined with the width of the nose gives quite a misleading and non-European sort of feeling to her. And if you combine that, the other thing is that they're using the Whitehawk woman as the main promotional thing. If I find like the Brighton Museum exhibits, what are they going to have? What's on at Brighton Museum today? Okay, queer looks, object journeys in Africa. You're seeing a theme of what sort of stuff they like to show. Where is it? Somewhere on here. Well, I don't know. But here, this is being shown there. And Whitehawk woman in this very left-wing town. They want it to be the main thing. This is a National Geographic article on it, and they talked to the guy who did the people involved. And actually, I think there's some good research gone into it, and it's a good project. The idea of having facial reconstructions to help people visualize their ancestors. But this one is obviously part of an agenda that it's been so dark. And I thought I'd look into the kind of people involved. And one of the people involved, who at least because in the white, I don't know what extent she's involved, but this is the lady, Hayley Forsyth McGee. And she's recently been involved in a report on the outcomes of the Whitehawk Community Archaeology Project, where they're getting people involved in local people in Whitehawk, which is a port, it's a part of Brighton, basically. It's a community in Brighton. See, it's up on a hill, and that's Brighton in the background. You can see in this picture. It's involved with Brighton and Hove Archaeological Society and Brighton and Hove Museum, the same people who are having this reconstruction display. And one of the people involved on this paper discussing the success of that is this woman. And I remember her from a discussion I had with her a while ago, because there was a skeleton found outside Eastbourne, and Eastbourne's just outside Brighton. And I thought this Whitehawk Camp Community Archaeology Project is Brighton area, and her name's associated with it, and the result is a woman who they tried to make look black without any evidence. And then I'm remembering her for something else she did in a similar thing back in the Eastbourne Ancestors Project. And I contacted her about this, but there was a claim that one of the women found there, Beachy Head Lady, was sub-Saharan African, and that she even has her own Wikipedia page, this thing, part of the Eastbourne Ancestors Project. And they claimed that based on Carolyn Wilkinson's forensic facial reconstruction, which basically means they had a look at the skull, that this was a pre-Roman, a Roman era sub-Saharan African woman living in Britain. And that was interesting because isotope analysis showed that she grew up in England. So she definitely wasn't an immigrant from Africa. She was born in England. So the only reason that they haven't done a DNA test, and I emailed a year or so ago saying, because BBC had included Beachy Head Lady as one of the greatest Africans in British history as well. So they've gone all that, like saying that this is an African person. I said to our friend, Hayley Forsyth McGee, what DNA evidence do you have? Because although forensic study of skulls, facial reconstruction is quite good. Like, it's not bad. I'm not saying it's a fake science, but it isn't foolproof. And anyone in a court of law can say that, because like when you're IDing, you can say like with some certainty from a skull, this is pretty like a sub-Saharan skull. So you could say that, but like, it's not you know, it's not 100% foolproof like DNA. If they got a DNA sample from that sample, they would be able to tell you straight away, no problem at all, that this was what the ancestry of this woman was. But this has been a few years gone by now, and even though she's got her own page on the BBC website and her own Wikipedia page, and I asked Miss McGee what was the deal, and she said, "Oh yeah, we're going to get a DNA test thing on it." Well, you know what? Even the Reich lab and Harvard lab, they can do like sequencing of ancient DNA now for like less than $100. So it's not like a budget issue anymore. The weird thing about this skull is it's an Eastbourne museum, which is so tiny and insignificant museum. It's not even in Brighton, which is the city on the south coast with a Bright museum. It's on Eastbourne Museum, this little town. And if it was really a sub-Saharan African skull, it would, and it's the significance of that the BBC has given it, and that like people are claiming, why is it, you know, being held up in this tiny little museum and no one's doing a DNA test, no one's looking into it? It isn't proven to be sub-Saharan African, and they've jumped the gun on this. And they really should do some DNA testing to prove it. Anyway, I thought I'd get in touch with her, and then afterwards she answered me then, and then she went stony cold, and I think I haven't heard from her since then, and I've forgotten all about her until I saw this thing, and I just saw her name associated with it, and I don't know what to make of that, because the guy who did the reconstruction is a different person, and obviously he did this reconstruction based on a skull, and then he was advised by other people that this could be a complexion, and they've told him to make her dark. How dark did they tell this man, this artist, Olson, I believe his name was? How dark did they tell him to make it? Because they had no justification for telling him to make it this dark. There's no scientific reason to think that, when we can look at modern day Sardinians and others who she's related to and see how dark they are. Like, let's just Google Sardinian people. Not so dark. Not so dark at all. Well, I'm going to stop screen sharing now and go back to so anyway, now I'm back on screen. I will just see if there's any super chats or anything. Okay, super chat. Can you explain Black Irish? My dad said his ancestry is that, and he looks more Iranian than anything. Don't trust PC search results to define it. Black Irish is like, just, it doesn't refer to black people or like Arabs or anything. In fact, black in old like English terms, when we say he was dark or swarthy, it doesn't mean like his skin. It just means if you have black hair or black eyebrows, you could say someone was dark. And there are Celtic names like Ciar or Kieran, meaning like dark or dark one. It just means someone with dark hair. And so some people in Ireland had darker, when we say darker features, it doesn't mean black skin, it just means dark hair or black hair. And there's a diversity of complexion, hair pigmentation and such in Ireland. And I guess Black Irish is just a colloquial term to refer to Irish people with dark features. Some people in America especially think that all Irish people are ginger, but actually people who know, in Britain, we think of Irish people as being quite dark because they're generally darker. In the British Isles, like Scottish and English people are lighter. They have much more frequency of blonde hair than Welsh or Irish people. And in general, actually, Britain is one of the most blonde countries in the world. It's funny how in America, people often think that we're dark. Actually, no, like Ukrainians have far less amounts of blondness than English people do. You can look at statistics for that. I mean, the only places in the countries that have higher rates of blondism than England and Scotland are Scandinavian countries and Denmark and Germany, and that's it pretty much. Also maybe like Lithuania, the Baltic, like, you know, Lithuania and Latvia and that. But like everywhere surrounding the Baltic is quite high levels of blondness. But outside except for that, it's only the British Isles that have high rates. Anyway, let me see who else has a super chat or anything. Nope, just one. Okay. So what are we going to do now? I guess I've talked quite a lot about that that woman and everyone's going to get in a tizzy about it, I know, but maybe, you know, it's not such a big deal, because actually, as I said, I quite like the other reconstructions, and even that reconstruction, I guess it wasn't so bad, except the complexion and the width of the nose was a bit off. But maybe I don't see the actual skull. Maybe she did have an unusually wide nose. Some people do have unfortunate phenotypes. John Mansell says a high percentage of blondists doesn't exist in Germany. It does, actually. It's not as high as Scandinavia. It's lower, but it's higher than most of the world. Germany is one of the highest. It's the next highest, not as high as Holland and Scandinavia, but it's high. It's slightly higher than England. Color is not synonymous with race, someone says. It's not synonymous with, but it's a phenotype, and phenotypes are expressions of genes, and races are just, you know, different geographic genetic clusters, like, you know, groups of people who are defined, who are genetically different from one another because of geographic isolation. That's so yes, there is a relationship between phenotype and race, of course. It's one of the and of course, complexion is one aspect of phenotype. The aborted stream was called the metaphysics of paganism. Will you not talk on this anymore here? Yeah, I could talk a bit on that, actually. I was just gonna do that, but then I switched because I thought this is quite a fun subject, and it's like it's hot on the news. I'm trying to be like trying to be talking about current events a bit. Who is your favorite Saxon figure? Maybe Penda the Pagan, being that he was a pagan like me, and he was resisting incoming ideologies that were corrosive to his own culture. Yeah, I respect him, but also not just pagans. I think people like Alfred as well, because Alfred was a great leader and a wise man. Like, you know, he's one of the, you know, he founded the English nation. The dream of an English people was, you know, a couple of generations before him. His grandfather and Bede were, you know, thinking. Sorry, not Alfred's grandfather, but Bede was the one who invented it. Alfred fought for it, and Alfred's grandson realized it. But without people like Alfred, first without, you know, the intellectual Bede to envisage the unification of the Germanic peoples of the British Isles, then Alfred to fight and unite them against a common enemy in the form of the Vikings, and finally his grandson to realize that as a nation. People talking about eyes and stuff and hair. I think it is important not to get too obsessive about that, because it starts to get a bit autistic and silly. You missed my question about Black Irish. No, I didn't. I answered that. I did answer that. Unless there was a problem with the stream. Did no one hear it? You missed my... He says it again. No, I didn't miss it. I said... I don't know why you didn't see it. Yeah. I will not miss any questions this time, because last time I missed a few, and then I had to answer them in the question, and answer them in the comments. If for some reason I make a mistake and I miss a super chat, I will definitely answer it in the comments after the stream, because I'm sorry I did that before. Are you aware of the concept of biohistory? I don't know what you mean by that, but I can guess from the word bio, as it's about history as bio. It's a materialist conception of history, which is about which is concerned with biology. So, like, you know, something to do with like history as seen like by the access to biologically advantageous conditions or something along those lines. But, you know, I recommend that if you want me to talk on something, you don't give it in like ask a yes or no question, because it doesn't encourage me to elaborate, because I'm not sure exactly what you want me to say. Best of Ola books. I mean, the bigger ones, I guess. The small, often Avola, he just reiterates different things in different ways, but I mean, his big ones include all the stuff that's in the small ones mostly anyway. Best books to learn about metaphysics from a pagan perspective. That's a good question. I've been thinking about that a bit because, as I obviously said, pagans always said, like, you got to read the primary sources like the Eddas and stuff. And obviously, when it comes to like the exoteric definition of like pagan behavior, we know how that was defined. Paganism was all about sacrifices. The pagans, all Indo-European religions were based on this. Like the rite is the fundamental aspect of exoteric piety. It's if you're not, it doesn't. They didn't even care about belief. Like Christians, you have to believe. Do you believe? Do you accept Christ? The pagans actually didn't give a monkey's uncle whether you believed in the gods or not, although they all did. But if some people, and there were some atheists, if someone said they didn't believe, they say they don't care. I don't care if you believe or not. You must participate in the rites. You must participate. We see that in the Roman Empire. Why did the Romans get angry with the Jews? Because they wouldn't participate in the public rites. Why did the pagans in Scandinavia say you have to participate in the Yule sacrifice? Even if you're a Christian, you have to, because it's about the rites. That is what paganism is. It's about participation in the rites. But that's only the exoteric. How do we get to the esoteric? Snorri didn't write down what the esoteric interpretations are. Many people want to write down their own and invent their own esoteric things. I would say that the greatest options for us there, and I've said this before, many people know, there's two versions we have of like written down examples of people giving, of old traditional, learned scholars within an Indo-European tradition writing about the esoteric interpretations of that tradition. One is the Vedas, which have since been interpreted in India by learned and holy people, so we can see the metaphysical development into the esoteric meaning of the myths depicted in the Vedas. But the other, and closer to home, is people like Sallust, the Neoplatonists. Basically, the ones I'm most familiar with are Julian the Apostate. I don't like that name. I'd call him Jewish. Call him Julian the Pagan, because he was raised in the Christian tradition, but he left it and went back to paganism because he thought it was better. Emperor Julian was a Neoplatonist, and he was part of that movement. So there was a lot of polemics against Christianity. They claimed that they had a lot of. They didn't like the metaphysics of Judaism and Christianity. They thought it was superstitious. And just nicked things from confusedly stole other mixtures of traditions into a new way, which was anti-intellectual from their perspective. However, it is undeniable that Christianity was heavily influenced by Neoplatonism, because Neoplatonists had a conception of the one, and that was something also that we see in Hinduism now. But we don't see it written down in the Eddas at all. But we can presume that something like that would emerge from a metaphysically advanced form of paganism, and was probably understood that all the gods are manifestations of one supreme being, and whether that supreme being is considered personal, as impersonal force, like the Neoplatonists believed, or as certain aspects of Indian tradition believed. But others have since subsequently in India, there's an idea of the supreme godhead as a supreme personality, like the Hare Krishnas believe. I personally lean away from that. I prefer the Neoplatonist idea that the gods are not the gods are personalities, and these personalities are aspects, incorporeal aspects of the limitless and supreme being who is impersonal and unknowable. You cannot know that being. You cannot worship it directly because it's so so great and encompasses everything. In a sense, we are also part of that God. But it's not pious to build a temple to that god, or to try to depict it as an idol. No, instead depict the gods who are aspects of it. And this is the sort of thing that kind of in Neoplatonism, and it's developed. And I'm reading a lot about them. I mean, Celsus is really great as a criticism of Christianity. He's the first written like criticism of Christianity. He really didn't like them. And he uses all kinds of different forms of polemics to try and argue against him. He even adopts the viewpoint of the Jews, having first said he doesn't like Jews. Then he goes on to say, if I was a Jew, here's what I would say about Christianity. So he uses, like, you know, different forms of argument. And also, but he does of course, the Christians banned a lot of the Neoplatonist literature, but that means the only things we get of Celsus are those that survive in the responses to him. Like, Christians had to, like, respond to his criticisms, and then in Christian literature we find quotations from Celsus, and those can be compiled into the fragments of Celsus. Worth a read, definitely, for any pagan. It doesn't really get so much of the truth, the metaphysical truth of paganism, because, like, of course, those aren't the bits that the Christians want. Rather, they pick and choose those points that they think they can counter. So not everything's great in Celsus, but Sallust is great. This is collected by Proclus. Proclus is a Neoplatonist, and he was writing about Sallust, quoting Sallust's teachings. And he got some hymns in here, and also, like, some just talking about, like, what is the meaning of, for example, he gives an interpretation of different myths and how you can understand them metaphysically, and that includes one scene from Homer's Iliad or Odyssey, I can't remember which, where an apple is passed around the table. Where I can see the quote. Okay. With Paris involved. I'll just read it as an example. Discord at a banquet of the gods threw a golden apple, and that a dispute about it arising among the goddesses, they were sent by Jupiter to take the judgment of Paris, who, charmed with the beauty of Venus, gave her the apple in preference to the rest. For in the fable the banquet denotes the supermundane powers of the gods, and on this account they subsist in conjunction with each other. But the golden apple denotes the world, which, on account of its composition from contrary natures, is not improperly said to be thrown by discord or strife. But again, since different gifts are imparted to the world by different gods, they appear to contest with each other for the apple. And a soul living according to sense, for this is Paris, and he's talking about sense as in, like, your sensory perceptions, like your material perceptions, not perceiving other powers in the universe, asserts that the contended apple subsists alone through the beauty of Venus. But of these species of fables, such as the theological, belong to philosophers, the physical and animastic to poets, but the mixed to initiatory rites. Since the intention of all mystic ceremonies is to conjoin us with the world and the gods. There's some just gems like this in there. I really recommend, get into the Neoplatonists if you want to know about pagan metaphysics at an advanced level. But if you're not, into, like, the big brain stuff, just at least do as I said. Like, to be a pagan, you have to participate in rites, you have to participate in rituals, you have to make sacrifices. That is it. If you want to know what a pagan is someone who participates in the sacrifices and the rites. If you don't, you're not a pagan. That's pretty much it. If you say I'm a pagan because I believe in X, no, because that's not how pagans. Belief is this Judaic idea. Like, they define themselves by the beliefs, and their beliefs was that you shouldn't participate in the rites. But they were even a sacrificial religion as well at one point. But okay, I got some more super chats. I got to go back and look through them. I might have missed them all. Otherwise, 3, 4, 5. Okay, what are your thoughts on the Industrial Society and Its Future by Ted Kaczynski? I read that years ago, and it obviously makes some good criticisms of how industrial society has impacted the world negatively, and how technology affects us negatively. Obviously, he is a little bit over the top in some of his conclusions. I think, like, practically you have to live in the world, and like, you can't, if you want to not use technology, that's fine. I'm just saying that's fine, but technology is here, and it's not going to go away because you try and avoid it. which is what he realized, because that guy, originally he was just going to say, I'm going to cut myself off from technology and that'll be fine. That's my solution. But then technology encroached on his little cozy area he had created for himself. And then he decided instead to resort to terrorism. And that didn't work out for him either. So if you're looking at Ted as some kind of like, you know, role model, then you need to rethink things, because he wasn't successful in any of his goals. I believe in ecology and I think we should respect nature, but we're not going to achieve that by just like a kind of blanket rejection of technology. But it's right to say that we should be very cautious about the way technology changes us. We are all cyborgs now. In the way that we communicate, we depend on technological extensions. In our phones in our pockets, our computer screens. We use. I used to always draw maps on my hand or on pieces of paper before I went out to someone's house or something, so that I'd find the way for an address. But even for years, I resisted having a mobile phone, a smartphone. But then, as soon as I got a smartphone, I found that I depend on maps much more, and I don't remember my way around, because as soon as you externalize your what was formerly an internal mental process and you outsource it to a machine, your brain stops like having that capacity as much. It's just like if you do mental arithmetic a lot, then you get better at it. And as soon if you use a calculator, then your ability to do mental arithmetic will suffer as a result. And it's the same for anything like Google Maps or whatever apps you're using that you formerly you would do something else. So that's the sort of thing we should be. That's one of the kinds of things you should worry about in technology. Of course, there are other even greater and more sinister aspects. But yeah, I think I'm very against transhumanism and the post-human ideal. I'm very much against that. But I'm not a Luddite. I believe I'm happy to engage in technology, but I think that the way that technology is incorporated into human lives has to be done with a process of discrimination, where we choose which ones are conducive to the kind of existence that we want to have. Okay, next question. Your thoughts on cyclical time versus linear time as a bedrock for world view and creating selective pressures within your culture. Well, yeah, I think that cyclical time is I follow the cyclical time model, and of course it is it's more in keeping with nature. The problem with linear time is that it doesn't actually gel properly with the reality of history and of nature. So some people say, well, we need to progress, you know, like if you keep thinking that everything's going to just go back down to zero and come back again, then you're absolving yourself of responsibility of participating in the story of history. We have to be Faustian. We have to move towards this glorious vision. Well, actually, this manic kind of obsession with progress is totally the product of that restless Faustian spirit, so-called. And I mean, you know, when you need to prepare, like the cycles of the year happen every year and farmers prepare those cycles, but that doesn't stop them preparing for the harvest because they know there's going to be another harvest another year. It's not really like just cyclical time doesn't demotivate people at all. I mean, you participate in the world regardless. And I think, and all like traditions that believe in cyclical time also argue that, you know, tell people to endeavor to be the best person they can, you know, improve themselves, achieve as much as they can. The idea that cyclical time is something that like demotivates people and causes like it atrophies the development of a culture is silly. So it's not borne out by what you look at history. Like pagans used to believe in cyclical time. They achieved a lot in ancient Rome and ancient Greece and ancient India. So yeah, I wouldn't go in for all that. The argument for linear time is based on the idea of year zero, and year zero is the birth of Christ. And then obviously, if you don't worship Christ as God's embodiment on earth, it's like this, the most important event in the history of the world that had happened and will ever happen. And of course, without that, like, you know, point in time to like measure everything else by, that becomes quite meaningless, a linear thing. And even in the absence of it, the secular Western progressive worldview is still so, you know, born from the momentum of that initial explosion out of like Christianity and into the future. Like we're progressing into it and waiting for the rapture, or as the secular people call it, I don't know, nowadays they have global warming instead. It serves the same function. Now let me find the next question. When you pass from this world, would you rather be cremated or laid to rest in the barrows? Why not both? You know, a lot of barrows contain cremation urns, and that's like interesting because like the Bell Beaker people in Britain, often the barrows just contain an urn, like I showed in the Beaker video in Exmoor, and Anglo-Saxons the same. Like they put urns inside barrows. The Celts didn't do that, but anyway, you know, I would be happy if I would. I mean, I don't mind as much whether I'm cremated or not, but I would be very privileged to have a barrow erected in my honor, but only if I deserve it. Silly questions. Let me see. What do we got next? What do you think of Woden's folk and Wolf Ingesnew's writing? Woden's folk, for those who don't know, are a British Hoff, I guess you call it, like a pagan community in Britain. They operate out of Sussex, and they have. I'm not a member. I'm not. Never met up with them or anything. But I endorse all pagan groups in Britain because we're at a stage now where we need paganism to, you know, I mean, we need pagans to come together and stop criticizing each other all the time for every little thing. But they have actually developed their own mythology as well now, like, which is fine. Like, but they have a mythos which is specific, which isn't based, you know, with something that they have. I think that someone among their number they call a prophet, who has received a vision from which they continue their belief in like in some. It's like reflects the beliefs of that Hoff, of that community, yeah. So that's interesting because, of course, paganism is a living religion and it develops, and you have regional cults and things like that. So these guys in Sussex have their own regional cult essentially within Woden's folk. Do we know what the family structure in Germanic Nordic pagan communities? Well, yeah. I mean, because we have so much written literature on that, because one, we've got Tacitus talking about these people, and we also have about like in 2,000 years ago, whatever, like what the Germanic people, he was talking about like people in southern Germany, but they're ultimately from like quite similar to other Germanic tribes. And there's also, we've got the sagas. There's so many sagas. I'm guessing you've never read any sagas, because like it tells you all kinds of stuff, like the household. Like, I mean, you've got like a chieftain. It's a center, and his house is like where some people can go. That serves like a village hall / pub. And the way you position on the table is the hierarchy. It's patriarchal, very patriarchal, all centered around the Lord and his retinue, his saints. People marry, and you want to know about family structure. I'm just thinking what exactly you want to know. I mean, the family structure isn't connected to the religion. It's just in any obvious way. It's just because you say pagan communities. But the concept of the nuclear family, I mean, their family was basically, yeah, they weren't like have communism, or they didn't share the children or have wives in common or any weird thing like that. Like most cultures are just like, there's a man and a woman, they get married and they have babies. And that is not like something that was invented in the 1950s. It's something that just humans do. There are some exceptions, but those are rare. So the Germanic people, their wives would, they would marry, and then they would have children. But one thing that's quite unique, I suppose you want to hear about something different, is that very often a strong role would be played by the maternal uncle. So the mother's brother would, for sons, I'm talking about, sorry, if a woman has a son, her brother would play a massive role in its raising as well. So like they have kind of a secondary father, a foster father, and foster fathers were a big thing in Germanic cultures, really big. And it was almost always the mother's brother who was the foster father. And I don't know why that is, but I think even Tacitus mentions, if I remember correctly, something like that. So that if that is the case, then you can show that like over 1,000 years later, the Icelandic sagas are writing about the same thing, which means it was a deep ingrained Germanic custom and very important. So despite being patriarchal, so a man carries on his father's line, and he's like judged by the worth of his father to some extent. He also has a connection to his mother's family, especially through his uncle, and that uncle would have almost as a significant role as a kind of father, but not as a baby. It's only this level of comes in later when he starts to become a man. Then the foster father has to have an extra role, and actually that kind of makes sense because you see, like in modern societies, often teenage boys start to rebel quite strongly against their fathers. So having like a secondary father figure in the form of the maternal uncle, kind of he can like. They can go away and live with their foster father for a while, and he can like help transition them through that difficult period of adolescence into manhood. Next one. If you have time to look into biohistory, I would love to hear your opinion. I can't explain it over YouTube comments. Okay. Thanks for that donation, by the way. That was very kind, and I'll look into it and see what it is, and if it interests me, I'll mention it more. Halbrand Holt says the genetic relationship to the mother is absolutely certain, and not to the father. I'm afraid that is a bit of a modernistic view, because mispaternity events are very, very rare, even today. Even today, with the media encouraging people to be unfaithful, etc. Sometimes you get statistics where people say something like a really high amount, like 25% or 20% of births are mispaternity events. That's when the wife has been unfaithful and the father isn't who is believed. But these statistics aren't European specific. I won't say any more than that, but as you can imagine, fidelity is not the same in all cultures. But the idea when people think about like, oh, whether a mispaternity event like in the Victorian times, no, not very likely at all. Like women get married like in their teens and have like 10, 13 children or something, and they all look the same because they all got the same father. It's not like, you're not thinking in like the actual realities of these cultures, like the idea that women were being unfaithful that often. And even, let's go back, there's an example of a Roman woman, I can't remember her name. She was boasting about her infidelity. She was like she was some like noble, aristocratic Roman woman who was just very decadent. And she would say, she had an expression, I won't take on any cargo until I'm already loaded, meaning that she wouldn't be unfaithful to her husband until she was already pregnant with his child. Because then even the Romans, like even when there's a woman who is very immoral and she wanted to be unfaithful to her husband, she wouldn't do that until she was pregnant with his child first, because then if she's pregnant, she knew she couldn't become pregnant again. And it was very, very important in traditional cultures for your child, for paternity to be certain, because there was no divorce or anything like that. If a man didn't believe that his wife was faithful, or didn't believe that his son was his, he wouldn't raise it. Like, and then the wife is screwed. So it certainly didn't happen. Like infidelity was not as widespread as now, and even now, with infidelity being quite widespread, mispaternity events aren't, because people make sure of that. They don't want to have accidentally get pregnant from the wrong person. So yeah, I don't think that is a good explanation for why it's the paternal uncle actually at all. I think it's more to do with it's a tradition of like involving both sides of the family. I can also attest personally that I only managed to trace back my Rousel line to 1700, but it diverges from other Rousels at least that far, maybe much further. But every other Rousel who had a DNA test from other lines, not talking about within my line from that past since then 1700, they all have my haplogroup, but also the ones who are from before that 1700 divergence, they have the same haplogroup too, and it's not a common haplogroup in England. It's like I1 is not. It's like 15% of the country, so yeah, or 10%. It's not very much. So yeah, like that basically means that, like, I mean, how many generations? I mean, 300 years on my side, no mispaternity events, and 300 years on theirs and no mispaternity events. And you're talking like, I don't know how many generations that is, but something like 6 or 7 each time. So like 14 generations or something like that, but or more. I don't know. But yeah, like, don't fall for that. Like, I mean, actually, if you want to know about like what the likelihood of it, go to like an Islamic country, or like even a Hindu country, like, and go to any country where traditional religion is still enforced, and how likely do you think it is that women are sneaking out at night to go and get pregnant from another man and then conceal that fact from their husbands? Think about the risks involved. It's not a common occurrence. It's really not. And yeah, someone said adultery was heavily policed. Yeah, all traditional societies do that. Christian, Muslim, whatever. What do you think about the Hispanics of the Americas? Is their mixture of European, indigenous, and African ancestry interesting? Not that much. I mean, no, I don't really think it's that interesting. Are you familiar with Orphism? Recently, some esoteric commentary on Orphic rites were discovered in Greece. No, I'm not. I should look into that. Thank you for that recommendation, Nicholas N. I should look more into the Orphic rites and these recently discovered details. I mean, so to go back to the other one, talking about the African indigenous and African ancestry. Interesting. Well, I say, Eduardo Reyes, thank you for your donation. I go back to your question. I don't know what you mean by interesting. Like, obviously not that interesting, or my channel would be devoted to talking about mestizos, but it isn't. It's about things I am interested in. Basically, it's a case of we know everything about it, so it's not so much uncovering like a mystery. Like, all these different peoples were in this area, and the peasants of European peasants and African slaves and some Native Americans started breeding with each other. It's a pretty transparent process. We know that happened. But now we're also seeing some interesting things. More interesting stuff about Latin America is that nearly they did a DNA test on Latin America, and loads of Latin Americans have Jewish ancestry, Sephardic Jewish ancestry. And the reason because of that is that founding effect, because Sephardic Jews were in South America quite early when the settling was happening, because they saw some opportunities there that they didn't have in Europe. And as a result, like, there's a thing called founder effect, which is the same thing that is why a lot of people in the United States have English ancestry, even though they don't think they do, because the English were there first. So to put it this way, like, if like you have only 10 English guys move to this town, then 100 years later, 100 German guys move there and 100 Irish guys. You think that town's going to be later, the population 100 years later, they're going to be all German and Irish and hardly any English. But you're wrong, because 10 guys, let's say 10, I said 10, like say 10 guys and 10 girls, they already expanded their population, and all the people who come subsequently interbreed with the people who were there first. So everyone then subsequently has that English ancestry no matter what. So that's why a lot of people in America have English ancestry, even though they think their ancestors are all German or Irish, because the first people there were English. So they were the founder effect is there. The same reason that there's Sephardic Jewish ancestry in a lot of South Americans, even though there weren't that many Sephardic Jews, but they were there early. Another interesting thing about Spanish DNA is that, that in South America, is that a lot of them had Middle Eastern DNA of other sources. So Sephardic DNA is one. Another is Moorish DNA, and that is partly because of what was thought about the Moorish invasion of Iberia in medieval times, and also because of these people called conversos, who were like Muslims or Jews who converted to Christianity to prevent getting oppressed by the Inquisition. And then also afterwards, people still didn't really like them, so a lot of them left Iberia. When the opportunity to migrate to South America came, they were the ones who moved to South America. So the white people in South America were somewhat less white than most whites anyway, but when they went there, because they were already overwhelmingly people with Jewish and Arabic ancestry, that's interesting, because that's only been uncovered now, and that is not recorded in any records at the time, but we're seeing it now in genetic science. Am I moving towards the end of time? No. I was just disturbed then. All right. I'm just coming towards the end of this because I only wanted to do 1 hour. So anyone got any more questions they want me to forward? Hacking civilization. If you were motivated to move to Britain out of love of culture, archaeology, sacred sites, where would you move? Preference for rural living, but I do live in Britain. Hacking civilization, thank you for your kind donation. Yeah, I mean, I live in Devon, and Devon has quite good archaeology and sacred sites, but there are, I mean, depends what you want. Like most of the best Anglo-Saxon sites are actually up on around the eastern coast, like in Norfolk, and quite a lot in Kent and Essex. But I wouldn't live in those places. My ancestry isn't from that part of England, and it's very flat and not so nice. Like a lot of my ancestry is from here, North Devon, so this is like an ancestral land for me. So I live around here. Also, it's very, very beautiful here. I find it's much more beautiful than Norfolk, so I wouldn't live there. But I mean, there's other kinds of like beautiful places in England. I'd say would be the Lake District is incredibly beautiful. As for archaeology, they have some stone circles from the Neolithic circles there. It's quite interesting. There's a few Iron Age forts up there, Roman as well. It's just a really beautiful place. That's up in the north near the Scottish border, and then a bit further south you've got the Peak District, which is really beautiful, quaint little villages, some hills, and there's little medieval villages, like a plague village there, where people built up a genetic immunity to plague, and even today those people are very likely to be immune to HIV. And there's lots of like Anglo-Saxon barrows there. There's crosses from Celtic and Anglo-Saxon stuff. It's a good place and very beautiful. So yeah, and that's rural. They're both rural, Lake District and the Peak District. They're both national parks. And then down in Devon here, you've got like Exmoor with lots of there's barrows and there's some stone circles. It's very beautiful. Dartmoor has a lot of Neolithic stuff. There's a lot of Neolithic monuments around Britain. Well, this is not the area that I study most. I'm more interested in Bronze Age and Anglo-Saxon stuff. But I mean, archaeologically, the Bronze Age and Saxon stuff are just barrows. They're just piles of mud. So I wouldn't necessarily just live next to one to look at it, because it's not that pretty. But it's interesting and fascinating for me. But yeah, I think, yeah, there's so many beautiful places in Britain. Some I've never been to. Like I hear the Yorkshire Dales are very nice. I've never been. Yeah. By the way, the most forested area, if you like forests, the weird thing is that the most wooded area in Britain is also one of the most densely populated areas. And that's just around London. You have, where I grew up, like the home counties, like Surrey and Sussex, very, very heavily. There's a lot of trees there, but it's not like in like Russia where there's this big wilderness of trees and no one lives there. But in England, we live among the trees. So our cottages are like, you know, dotted among inside the trees, and the roads are old Anglo-Saxon paths leading around, which you drive our cars with great difficulty along. But these are like expensive places because they're in the commuter belt. So like rich people can live there and then commute into London for their work and then get the hell out of London before night falls. Okay, joined a bit late. Can I get a summary on the African Britain? No, I'm not going through it again. Just thank you for your donation, Hans Lander, but I can't go through all that again. I did a big thing. This stream will be up live, so when this is over, just go back and watch the beginning. Someone from Norwegian, Erik Solfed. Your videos from Durham and Lindisfarne inspired me to travel and study at Durham University. Oh, that's great to hear. Congratulations. I'm heading back to England. I love it too much. Thank you. Oh, thank you, Eric. Yeah, that was from years ago. My Durham videos from nearly 9 years ago now. It was in 2010. I did a video on the Durham Cathedral, and then I filmed all that when I was on a road trip up to Orkney. And then on the way, we stopped at Lindisfarne to see the Viking raiding area and drink some mead. And we stopped at Durham, and I was impressed by the beautiful cathedral. And then went up to Orkney to see all the Neolithic monuments. Orkney is incredible. It's called the Egypt of the North. There's so much to see up there. If you love history, like it's just amazing. There's an island just north of Scotland. But then afterwards, I found this 10th century, or was it 11th century Old English poem about Durham, and I thought it would be nice to set it to these images of Durham Cathedral, and it fit quite well, I thought. And yeah, you can see it if you look through my old videos. If you were motivated to, I already saw, I've got that one. Yeah, sorry, hacking. Yeah. Okay. Could I get answer to my question? What question, Clint Girthwood? Thank you for your donation. I can't see it. There's millions of questions. I can't scroll through them all to find it. This funny stuff. It's too much for me to go through. Sorry. I would answer it if I could find it, but I can't find it. And thank you for 770 Villain. That's very kind of you to send that donation. There's a lot of talking about Irish people. Slough was a Saxon village, now only 34.5% native. Slough is not a very nice place to go. It's in Berkshire, I think. And Berkshire's a nice county. I lived for a long time in a village on the Oxfordshire and Berkshire border. That's near the Downs. And I think it's a beautiful place, but Slough is not. If I get enough money, one day I want to buy a cottage somewhere in the south of England. Well, the thing is, I can't afford to live in the parts of England that I grew up in, because anywhere near to London is commuter belt, and so it's expensive. So that's another reason I moved to Devon, is that I couldn't afford to buy a rural cottage like this anywhere that was anywhere near London, because of commuters making prices higher. But out here, his property's not so expensive. If you're up in the far north or the far west, it gets cheaper because there's no work. But if you have another way of earning a living, then you can get a house that way. But do you know anything about the ethnic links that Devon has with Gower in South Wales? Nothing about that. Nothing that I saw in the People of the British Isles project that didn't show up. There was no clear thing. But I mean, you can see Wales on a clear day from where I live. It's on the other side of the water. But there's also all forts along, like Iron Age forts and stuff. So I think that there was along the coast and along the river. So I think, they didn't necessarily want Welsh people to come over. The idea that Celts were all like friends before the Anglo-Saxon come is not true. We can see that they definitely were fighting each other a lot in the old days. You're doing great. Thank you, Lady Goldberry. Thank you, Lady Goldberry. Milady. The Spirit of Yule is an excellent book. Thank you, Random Anon. Okay, it's my supper time. I'm going to go and have trout. My wife is cooking trout for me, and I am looking forward to eating it. And I thank everyone for watching this stream, and I'll do another one at some point. I'm sorry that the Styx wasn't there, but okay, wait, before I go, Clint Girthwood's come back. I asked about Nordicists, if they're harmful to our community. I'm constantly ridiculed for being Black Irish. Scott, thank you. I don't know exactly. I think Nordicist is a pejorative invented by left-wing people, so I try not to use that kind of, these sort of neologisms if I can. But I'm not sure, so I don't even know how that's defined actually, what a Nordicist is exactly. But if it's someone who incorrectly ascribes a Nordic origin to people who aren't Nordic, then I'm against it, because obviously I always say I want to get to the truth of history. Yeah, sorry, I can't give you a better advice answer than that, but I do advise you don't use any kind of neologisms and left-wing terminology, because they're kind of, you know, what they're invented for a reason, to try and mess with you. All right then, good night everyone, thanks a lot. Oh, and by the way, before I go, one more thing. I am going to do a stream, hopefully this weekend, not with Styx, but with Guide to Culture, run by Frode Midjord. I was on it before for Christmas. I'm going to go on again on Sunday night, hopefully. And if all goes well, we will talk about one of my favorite films, Agire, The Wrath of God, by the German film director Werner Herzog. And yeah, I'm looking forward to that, because I love that film, and I'll talk about it for ages. Okay, good night.